novels so far. We also have Collins booksellers from Southlands here supporting Dave tonight. So at the end, you're more than welcome to come and purchase a copy, and I'm sure Dave's going to hang around for just a few minutes to maybe sign your book. So please welcome me in joining Dave Warner and Tony.
Thank you, Claire. Armadale Library has been fantastic, I've got to say. Really professional and got behind it right from the start. Now this is the first for many things. This is the first Warner gig in glasses. So, you know, I've worn them before, but I've never had to actually use them other than when I was just reading the big poem or something, which I don't need them for the start of this one. We're going to do a little song just to warm up things. Everything, of course, happens, as you know, or used to happen in Australia, in the car park, Tone.
Yes, I'm in the
Are you there yet? You know, you're in the car park of tuning still.
I'm just parking.
He hasn't got the reverse camera going yet, you know. Ready? Man of your advanced years. This is Tony Durant. You'll get to know him by the end of the night too. And, let's rock it, Tony.
Okay.
Well, I was standing at the bar and I was minding my own business when this ugly-looking fella says I tried to kiss his missus. I said I wouldn't know your missus from a piece of shark. He says, oh, would you mind repeating that over in the car park? Everything that happens seems to happen in the car park. Whenever there's a bubble, it's a bubble in the car park. Never do my shopping cause I'm rocking in the car park. I wanna see some action, so I'm stopping in the car park. Now when my baby moves, she gives me lumps of excitation. Now the way she sucks her straw fills me with expectation. And I whisper in her ear, honey, do you bark? She says, come on and I'll show you over in the car park. Everything that happens seems to happen in the car park. Whenever there's a bubble, it's a bubble in the car park. Never do my shopping cause I'm rocking in the car park. I wanna see some action, so I'm stopping in the car park. He had a 69 Ford, I had a 67 Holden. We traded insults through the window when my lights had long gone golden. He saw the semi-trailer just before he carked. He said, I knew I should have dragged you over in the car park. Everything that happens seems to happen in the car park. Whenever there's a bubble, it's a bubble in the car park. Never do my shopping cause I'm rocking in the car park. I wanna see some action, so I'm stopping in the car park. Oh, rock it, Tone. And the fattest little tummy, well, you'd swear she wears a corset. And she always lets you bite her where you never leave a mark. There's been long queues for hours waiting their turn in the car park. Everything that happens seems to happen in the car park. Everything's a bubble, it's a bubble in the car park. Never do my shopping cause I'm rocking in the car park. I wanna see some action, so I'm stopping in the car park. Car park. Car park. Car park. Car park. Hey. Thank you. Thanks, Armadale. One of the reasons for starting with that song is just to loosen us up, and also for you to know you're going to have a bit of fun tonight. I hope you will, for sure. But also because that song, when I was writing music and just music, it kind of is one of the sort of songs that I was writing, which is very Australian voice and our voice and our story, which for a long time we didn't get. We only got stories from in music from overseas, and even Australian bands used to sing songs about American places or English places. And so, I think it was an important time for people in rock and roll and stuff to do that. And so, also with writing, that's what I've attempted to do with a lot of my books, not all of them, and is to try and give a kind of feeling of my own identity and Australianness with it. But for my life of crime, this is what this is entitled, a big question is, like, I do ask myself, where did I first get fascinated with crime? I don't know how many people here are avid crime readers, or whether you've just come along for a look. Got some there, yeah, got a few there, a few down here. I'm sure that you guys, Lloyd and Alicia, is it Alicia? Yeah, would know that it's a very, very popular area or genre for reading these days, and readers are very loyal. They tend to go back to authors that they like, so for all those reasons it's a great thing to be involved in. But I do ask myself, as a kid growing up in Bicton, how did I, why did I end up with this? Now, someone gave me a Sherlock Holmes book when I was, I think, compendium, I was about 11 or 12. And looking back on it, that was probably the first time that I started to enjoy crime reading, crime fiction. But also, I used to live up on Castle Hill, and Bicton Baths, in those days it was pretty much bush around the place, and then Bicton Baths were down below. And in the late 1950s and early 60s, when I was a little kid in my bedroom, I could hear the drunken orgies of the bodgies and widgies having illicit fun down there near Bicton Jetty. And I wrote a performance poem about one of the great, almost forgotten hero in Australian history, Johnny O'Keefe. And I will forever associate Johnny O'Keefe with bodgies and widgies and luminescent pink socks. And this is how this one goes. Pink socked ripple sole, black DBs form furtive circles under fragrant trees, and strip jack naked the night away. All hail, J.O.K. Scared air hovers like a frightened waiter, handmaiden to iron-hard gladiators, and balances in its trembling fingers the lingering melodies of the She Wears My Ring singers, the eunuch choirs of the Punic fray. All hail, J.O.K. Sung to the beat of bundies, shied at the heart of brown glass skittles, sucked dry in the darkest cages of the farthest zoo, where cool-cats do what cat-men do, while lynx like widgies lay petals at the feet of J.O.K. Imperator Catalyst, martyred Prometheus, your blood infused our mosquitoed beaches, and imbued with life we poltergeists, we almost creatures. May your memory not fade away. All hail, J.O.K. So the next progression for me for crime writing was at school, and I was for a long time, I think as a boy around that, I loved Biggles, and I loved, there was a writer called Eric Leyland who wrote books that I loved, which always had people like knights and archers and people who'd try and storm castles, and the other ones would pour boiling oil on them, and I loved that sort of stuff. And I was in the school library and I found a book called The Maltese Falcon. I was about probably 13 or 14 by this time. And I thought it was going to be about that kind of thing, but actually when I read it I found it wasn't, but it was very exciting all the same. There was mists and echoing footsteps and gunshots and mystery. So this introduced me to another part of my life that I should have, of course, immediately followed up and gone and found out everything there was about, say, American crime fiction, but I didn't. I probably went to the library next week and that was probably the only book that they had of Dashiell Hammett, and so that was that. And instead, I went off into another direction, playing music. And like a lot of friends of my time, like Dickie Haynes over there, who some of you will have seen in his very famous band, Loaded Dice, among other things, and Tony here, we'll get to Tony in a moment. I had a band called Puss that played around about the time Dick was just a youngster, and that was kind of what you would call punk rock largely, probably a bit more humour than some of the British punk rock. But I got into songwriting and writing things, and I decided that Perth was too small for me. I was heading over to the big time, over to UK and London, and on my way there, I was with two mates, all Aussies did in those days, the three of you or four of you put in and you bought a combi van outside Australia House and toured around, and of course the combi van broke down in Spain, and which was the subject of another song of mine, which I can't mention because I'm on camera. But at this time in Spain, I was sitting there with my mates. We wired money through from France, where we'd been staying with a friend of mine that I'd gone to uni with, and Banque Nationale de Paris was the biggest bank in that region, and we wired money down to, in those days, there was no such thing as a credit card, not for us, to Banque Nationale de Paris. Only when we got to Barcelona did we find out that the bank didn't really exist. There was just a small clearing office, and they'd sent our funds back to Australia, so we were stuck in Barcelona with no money, except a few bucks on us, and hoping to for the little pension where we were sharing through to a bed to keep the little old ladies with the black away from us. And I wrote this song at that time about, and it's a good thing with youthful optimism, you don't worry about too much else. It's a nice night, stars are out, and you're cruising along in Barcelona. I'm cruising at night on a ferry down Barcelona Bay. Though I've got my problems, they seem like a mile away. My car broke down in Toledo and my money hasn't come. I'm dirty and hot, I don't know what I've got, but I still got some, still got some. And I'm riding my bike in Holland when the chain broke and I fell in to a bummer one summer with a girl. She was trying to lead me into sin. Well, I don't know if she succeeded, but I'm quite sure that I failed. For the things that she taught me, they quite were up behind, ended up in jail, up in jail. And I'm drunk as a skunk in London on a train called the London Tube. I'm all alone, I'm chewed to the bone, and my rent's overdue. Maybe the story will end right, maybe it won't end at all. Maybe I'm stuck in a bed and I'm luck, and I'm stuck here till next fall, till next fall. Hear it, Tony? Now I'm cruising at night on a ferry down Barcelona Bay. Though I've got my problems, they seem like a mile away. My car broke down in Toledo and my money hasn't come. I'm dirty and hot, I don't know what I've got, but I still got some, still got some. If you like any of the songs or anything like that, I can later tell you about them, and I have some CDs for sale, and for vinyl collectors, an original Summer 78 there, Summer 76, Summer 78, which was 45 that I produced here in WA in Perth. And I still had a couple of boxes in the shed about a year ago, and fantastic. So, genuine collector's item from that time in pristine condition. And this was the time that I met this gentleman here, Tony because I travelled around with my friends and we settled in London, and one of the cheapest places that we could get a flat was in Brixton. And at this time I wanted to record some of the songs that I'd written, like that one, Barcelona, and Suburban Boy, which became a hit for me many years later. And the street that I was in was pretty much all kind of West Indian neighbours, except for the house next door, which there was a whole bunch of nurses in that house, and who were working at the local hospital. And we were chatting away. We go to one another's parties, and I said, "Oh, I want to record this stuff, and I'm looking for a drummer." And one of them was dating a drummer at that time named Greg. And I said, "Well, you wouldn't know a guitarist, would you?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I've got a guitarist I work with, Tony." And so that's how Tony and I met, thanks to Greg, Randy Gregg and the nurse next door, in Plato Road in Brixton, and that was 1976, Tony, so right early in 1976. And so we traipsed all the way back, our paths crossed all the way back to there. And what happened was I came back after I wrote all these songs after Pass. I'd gone to England and of course didn't quite take it by storm. And so I came back to Perth and formed the band that I'd been thinking about while I'd been over in London writing all these songs. Dave Warner's from the Suburbs, with a theme that was all the music was going to kind of be about my life and Earth, and I was going to make this mundane world just as exciting as what the world of The Who or Bob Dylan or the Kinks when they were singing about London or New York or wherever. That was my aim. And so I came back and it was successful. You know, many of you have come and seen us in pubs and played many places like Dick There, places like the Charles Hotel and the Raffles and those big hotels at the time. And it was a very exciting time in WA, and of course we were flat out working over in Sydney back to Melbourne. But eventually that came to an end for one reason or another. After a few years I'd kind of had enough of full-time touring, but I always wanted to write. I wanted to write plays and I wanted to write television, and I always wanted to write books from the time that I was about 12. I wanted to write books of some sort. And around about 1983 in Perth, in one of these things with the late great Johnny Leopard, who was our guitarist and a terrific friend of ours, Johnny and I had been kicking around doing some comedy reviews after the Suburbs had stopped playing full time. And around about that time I had the idea, I'd got into Agatha Christie in Greece in 1980. I'd taken a break after 4 years with the band non-stop and gone to Greece, and I was in a place called Agios Nikolaos on Crete, and it was a wet, overcast day, and for something to do I went down to the little bookshop that had a few English books second hand and grabbed some Agatha Christie books. And I was very fortunate. The first book that I picked up was The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, which is probably her masterpiece. You know, she's done some other great ones, but certainly that was a real breakthrough in style. And I was so entranced with this, I went and read the second one, then went down and got all the Agatha Christie books that they had there, which was about 6 of them, and read them all within a couple of days. And what I found was by the time I was getting through the 5th or 6th book, I was starting to, while I was enjoying the books, I was also starting to understand some of her tricks and some of the little cards that she was poking at me to try and take, and some of the red herrings that she was laying down. So it was an interesting process. And when I was in, when the Suburbs stopped kind of playing full time, and I was doing these comedy reviews with Johnny, I had this idea with another friend, Dave Zampatti. I said, why don't we do a murder weekend where we have it like an Agatha Christie play and it all happens around people? And I actually wrote the script for that, and we did it down at Cave's house in Yelling Up, which I thought was a perfect Agatha Christie location. And it was great fun, but the main thing for me was that it gave me confidence that I could actually write a plot in crime genre. So that, winding ahead a bit further to a point where I'd gone to Sydney, and I was working there doing a bit of recording and doing a few other things, but not really anything full time. And I'd been reading a lot of crime fiction at the time, largely inspired by the late Johnny Leopard, who would say, listen, you've got to read this. He was the one who would give me Thomas Harris, and I'd read Silence of the Lambs till 3 a.m, and got to read this James Ellroy. And it was reading James Ellroy primarily, but also thinking back to the Maltese Falcon in those days, that I thought, you know, I would really like to try and do a big novel about an LA style novel, but using Perth, because I figured that Perth in the 70s, late 70s, when I got, as I was reading these things, it was pretty much like LA of the 30s or the 20s. You know, we're a hot, sprawling town. We're very car-based. People kind of go to bed early, but there's other stuff happening in and around the places. And so that was, in a sense, the inspiration for my first book, City of Light, which took about 4 years for me to do it. I started at page 1. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know structures. I just had one central idea, which is now a very hackneyed idea, but back when I did it in 1995 wasn't so much, which was that these police were going to be pursuing an investigation. They were going to catch the serial killer, weren't sure that they could get him, and they were going to take justice into their own hands, which they do. And they killed this guy, only to find out that, or realise that he wasn't the killer at all. So there's a great moral dilemma in it. And the City of Light, the book, paralleled, the story was of a young cop, ingenue cop, who over the 10 years from 1979 to 89, his innocence is corrupted, and I saw that as being kind of reflective of Perth, which at that time we had WA Inc. and all those things you might remember. Where Perth went from being a big sprawling town to a city, and then to a kind of city with a darker heart in some ways. So I collected, using the Elroy style of taking real crimes, I took iconic Perth crimes and wove them into one single narrative. So they weren't exactly the crimes. I didn't take exactly the crimes of Eric Edgar Cook, but I took that template, and the same with Bernie serial killers and Shirley Finn, and I put them into one narrative. And that was my first effort to write something, and it, as I say, it took about 4 years. I'd just about given up on it, and then Fremantle Press sent a thing. I'd sent a manuscript off to them. I thought, gee, if Fremantle Press won't do it, then no one in the world's going to do it, because it's set in Fremantle. And I was literally down to my last week in Sydney deciding I would go back to Perth. We were expecting our first baby, and then Fremantle said, yeah, we want to do it, but not for another year. So I had to hang on in Sydney for a year doing karaoke and stuff. But that book came out, and it was pretty successful. And I'll just read you a tiny bit, just because what I try and do when I come up with these book themes, when I write the books, I try and get a language that captures the city or the place. And so all my books aren't the same. Some authors are very consistent in the style that they'll write, or they might write from two characters and two styles, but mine really is that first bit of inspiration. And my first bit of inspiration with this book was, I want to do a big sprawling LA type novel, but I want to do it in Perth, and I want to use these iconic places. And this is quite late in the book, as Snowy Lane is now reflecting on all the things that he's seen over the decade. As we approached Perth, the captain doused the cabin lights, and I joined the first-timers in looking out of the little window at the sprawling, glittering grid that was home. When John Glenn had orbited the Earth in his spaceship, the city had responded to the request to turn on all its lights. Glenn noticed us, the pinpoint of civilization in the Cape of Black. We had been mentioned in dispatches. We were famous. We were the City of Light. 30 years on, there was still so much space here. Sweeping highways, only rarely punctuated by cars' headlights, revealed a slower pace. The buildings seemed stumpier, the suburbs drowsier, the horizon more vast. And yet in this remote hamlet, Judy Davis, Greta Scacchi and Snowy Lane had grown up, the famous and the anonymous. We had swum in the same Indian Ocean, been fanned by the same Fremantle doctor on the same days of atrocious heat, watched the same non-personalities on TV, made the same pacts with God for love and ambition. We had cruised the same boring Sunday streets, eaten hamburgers under the same red summer sky, pitched our spoons into plum pudding on the same searing Christmas afternoons. We were all children of the City of Light, and somehow I felt for once that Snowy Lane was no less a person than any other. In fact, Snowy Lane was especially privileged. So that's the style that I used for that book. And I'll just contrast that with the next book that I did, Big Bad Blood, which was set in Sydney in 1965. And I was living in Sydney then, and I'd always been fascinated as a kid listening to Two-Way Turf Talk and Ken Howard and Bert Bryant, and big steamy city. And when we were playing in the band, we played in King's Cross, and there was always something going down, something dangerous and dark and dirty going down in King's Cross. So this book I set in 1965. Of course, I hadn't been in King's Cross, and then I was about 10 years old. But I took the kind of nuances of the cross that I knew from my time in the band, 15 years after that, and put that into the style. And I felt that the style for a book set in Sydney had to be different, because Sydney's more muscular, it's more pacey, it's more violent in a sense than Perth, in a different sort of way. And so the language in this book is very different. So this is Big Bad Blood. John running like he was making for the goal line, his mouth dry, heart kicking. The old woman said she had seen the lady in the photo going in the back of 15 Tideman. One thought, get there. Vaguely aware of Shearer following, rotting posts, 9, 11, 13, then a slumping cottage hidden behind mangy trees. John ran down the path to the back, a lopsided veranda, made it in one, leap kicked in the back door, a mess, a sofa with its guts out, a sound to the right, John presenting the shotgun, running into the near-empty room, pockmarked plaster, a single bulb dangling from the ceiling. Beneath it, a human figure spread-eagled, face down on a bed, gagged, tied, naked, buttocks and back crisscrossed with cuts new and old. Above it, a young man in a shirt and slacks holding a long knife, two-handed, ready to plunge it down into the prone figure. John screamed, "Don't!" Amazement on the face of the knife man. Confusion. ID, Michael Foley out of drag. For a fraction, Foley frozen, then the muscles around his neck, thick cords. Foley shouting, Agnes Day, beginning to plunge the knife. A roar, the recoil jolting John's hands upwards and to the right. Foley exploding, blood and matter splashing the walls, the ceiling, a terrible ringing, a chill, John's bones refusing to warm like he had been shot. Then hands prying away the gun, an arm around his shoulder. Shearer, like a TV set with sound down, saying something, gradually penetrating the shield. You're okay, son. You're okay. So, really, very different style. It's a different book. That was much darker than City of Light. City of Light and Ingenue coming. This was a much more. You're into the belly of the beast in it, and interestingly, in that book, which is 1999, I had had a transgender infatuation interest for the cop. I had cover-ups by the Catholic Church of abuse. So lots of things that are now trendy and current. Believe me, Warner was there first. Certainly before many of the Eastern States writers, who I might say, get a little bit of credit for that sort of stuff, but believe me, they're first. Now I've talked enough about myself for the moment, because one, I'm going to get myself an orange juice, and I'm going to get Tony here a little glass of wine, because he's going to deserve it, after he's shown you why he is a world-class entertainer in his own right. Tony, what have you got for the game?
Well, I've got a song called Girl from Kandahar, which is, this thing, a song about arranged marriages, which I've got 2 daughters. Anyway, it's a little song called Girl from Kandahar. It's from the second Fuchsia album I made way back. Before I met Dave, about 1971, I did an album with this band called Fuchsia. It was a really strange string quartet band for Chrysalis Records in the UK. And it never did anything, and I just walked away from it, and that was the end of it, and the band broke up, and we went off and did different things. I came and played with Dave. And amazingly enough, about 35 years later, I get messages from the guy used to write a lot about the Chieftains. He was their sort of publicist. Found this album that I'd done and got in touch with me and wrote this amazing article in Mojo magazine. And it was kind of the Rodriguez story, really. It sort of resurfaced again, and then I did another album, and it got really good reviews. So I had also a band in Sweden that do cover versions of my old record. 25-year-old kids. It's just amazing. Life has some funny twists in it, doesn't it? Anyway, this song, Girl from Kandahar. I'm going to use a drum machine in this as well.
It's dangerous.
It can be very dangerous, I think. some to die standing. How could they ask her this? No choice but complying. A man more than twice her age, she's dead of all feeling. How now to find the voice to say that she's leaving? When to discover how to break the chains, to break the silence that you will not stay, cutting the bonds to freedom and take to the sky, cry to the darkness that you'll not be compromised. Eyes window to the soul, downcast and well hidden, and no man shall look upon. This girl is forbidden. Bring back that reckless girl, the lost girl from Kandahar. Restore the family name to some sense of honor. When to discover how to break the chains, to break the silence that you will not stay, cutting the bonds to freedom and take to the sky, cry to the darkness that you'll not be compromised. Whoa, whoa, there'll be no compromise. Whoa, whoa, no compromise. Alone on some distant road, where the wildflowers in season, a knife cuts the face of truth, kills all that is human. Eyes window to the soul, downcast and well hidden. Poor little reckless girl, this girl is forbidden. Oh, once discovered there's a hidden side, how easily two cultures can collide. Some talk around and they realize there's no escaping when two cultures will collide. When to discover how to break the chains, to break the silence that you will not stay, cutting the bonds to freedom and take to the sky, cry to the darkness that you'll not be compromised. Whoa, whoa, there'll be no compromise. Whoa, whoa, no compromise. Whoa, whoa, there'll be no compromise. Whoa, whoa, no compromise. Thanks very much, everybody.
I think you earned your red wine there, Tony. You earned it for that one.
Mercy me, mercy me. Cheers, everybody. Good to see you. Cheers.
I think Your City Delight you've got, yeah, the gang have got that. Big Bad Blood is available on as an ebook for people who are interested. And this one that I'm going to read from next, Espresso, is ebook, and I think you can order it on Amazon and get one of the sort of generic Amazon paperbacks. But I like this one. It's very different to most of mine. It's a bit more like Elmer Leonard, and it's a humorous style, and I'll just give you an idea again by reading a bit of the different styles of the books. And there was one scene that I had in my head that I conceived that started out and became this whole book. According to Goose, 3 years ago, Rick Bosky was a hard-working young man in over his head with a mortgage and new wife, neither of which he could afford. Miss Marietta used to dance for one of the pub lingerie outfits, but Rick didn't fancy his wife flashing her tush to guys like himself, so he told her to quit and get another job. This other job was shopping. Not shoplifting, just plain old shopping, with plastic. At this she was very good. In fact, the Kmart girls dubbed her Imelda. To pay the bills, Rick was working in a tyre place from 9 to 5, then doubling as an office cleaner, finishing in the early hours of the morning, catching a few Zs, then up again at the tyre place, 6 days a week and 6 nights. Then one of his mates, who was really just an acquaintance, suggested he might make some extra cash on Sundays minding a dope crop out Gin way. Marietta had pleaded with him to spend the time at home, but there were so many bills to pay that the thought of a couple of hundred cash, tax-free, for doing nothing but literally watching the grass grow was too tempting. So Rick took to the Gin job. After all, he figured it wasn't like it was hard work. The second week he's out there, trouble. After 2 hours of sitting in a steamer chair listening to the cricket, Rick had fallen into a sound sleep. He was still sleeping as the cops rolled up and burned the crop. At first they thought he was dead, he was so still. Then they heard him snoring. The cops told Rick all of this later back at the cells. They had lifted the steamer chair across to the van and carted him, chair and all, back to Perth. He only woke when he reached the city. With nothing of value to tell the cops, only the first name of the acquaintance who had recommended the job, Rick was gone for all money. Because they had nobody else to pin it on, the cops also charged Rick with maintaining the crop. His lawyer had laughed off the charges. They got nothing. You'll be out in a month. Marietta was already furious at him. The lawyer's fees meant she had to cancel her beauty therapy course, which she argued she had been planning to undergo precisely so she could earn money so he wouldn't get involved in this sort of crap. Selfishly, his actions had now kept her undertrained, unemployable and impoverished. To make matters worse, the lawyer suffered a freak accident the weekend before the trial. He'd been roaring around the Swan River impressing a surgically enhanced babe with the power of his twin Evinrudes and had just slipped a foot into the tow rope, doing the one-legged thing behind the boat, when the babe, who was driving, went to throw to full throttle. Trouble was the overhang of her implants made it hard to read the gear indicators, and she accidentally threw the boat into reverse. The shyster, who was still going forward, now met the boat, which was coming back at full force. Given the leg in the air position, he took a shocking blow amidships and was taken to hospital with a badly torn scrotum. So I like all types of writing and crime, and the idea that started itself and became a book in that was that if you meet this young guy, Rick Bosky, he's not a bad guy. He's been in prison and he gets out and he's trying to do the right thing, but Marietta continues to haunt his life he picks up the wrong phone and he gets this phone call that says, if you drop the package at the place, follow and you'll get $20,000. And he thinks, that's right, the package, it must be drugs. So he gets some icing sugar and he makes up a fake packet of a package to drop. And he's driving out and he's getting these intermittent phone calls and he winds all the way up in Kalgoorlie in this little shack, and he opens the door and there's a big guy there sitting with a shotgun and he says, where's the package? And Rick produces the package and he says, where's the girl? And so he then realises that the package is the girl, and the girl bursts through the door at that minute. And that was the image that I had in my head, was just simply that scene, that someone comes in, where's the package? They've got a fake package there, and then the girl appears on the scene. So, a book for me can just come from any little thing. In the case of Before It Breaks, so we're going to do the Cyclone song next time.
Cyclone song, thank you. Feel
free to join in, Dickie Haynes, if you'd like. And you've done it more than once or twice. Sometimes there can be a long gestation period in the books. So for Waiting for the Cyclone, I'd had that book Espresso in 2000, and then I was just writing full-time in film and television for 10 years. And I would occasionally get ideas that I wanted to do as a book. And around about 2001, 2002, I was reading a lot of Henning Mankell and James Lee Burke. And I'll throw these names out, they may mean something or nothing to you, but both of those, to me, are great crime writers who use location as a real sense of, as a character in itself. And I thought, I want to do a book like that next time I do a novel. And I had to wait 12 years, and then a year or so writing and editing before it came out finally in 2015. And the book was called Before It Breaks, eventually. But my working title for this book was Waiting for the Cyclone, which was an old song that I used to do. And the reason for that was that when I had this idea, look, I really want to do something where the geography and the place, the sense of the place is a character in itself, and I want to make it Australian. Okay, so where in Australia can you do? Well, Tasmania, that's a bit like Sweden, or, you know. And in the end, I said the only place that's really, really unique to Australia is the Kimberley. There's nothing like that anywhere. You know, there's other places that have got desert, and there's other places that have got a bit of mountain, but there's nothing quite the same as that. And so I decided that I would set a book there, and I made a note, you know, crime in Kimberley. And, but I wanted it to have roots and a contrast to somewhere around the world. I wanted it to be a bit more of a universal story. And where was this other place going to be? So the story ended up, it happens in the Kimberley in Broome in 2015, but all the time you're going back to the kind of genesis of the crime that happens there, which happens in Hamburg in 1979. So you got those two things, and I did that deliberately because I just wanted to contrast. But the mood that I wanted to create was the mood that I created in this song way back in 1980 on my fourth album, which is their Correct Planet, which is a combination of two albums, Correct Weight and This Is My Planet. This was from the This Is My Planet song. And let's give it a go, Tone. Hoppers are hopping and the crickets are clicking. The boys are sweating and the girls all glisten. The fridge is open but the beer isn't cold, and they go na 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 na. The cards are tumbling but the dice are still. So's the cockroach by the windowsill. He picked the wrong place to find a thrill, and he goes na 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 na. Belinda drapes herself like Marilyn Monroe. Her wet dress clings and her breasts are hard. The boys don't notice in the smoky room, though they just scull their beer and play their cards. They go na 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 na. Big Jim and Black Gary married to Fat Ginny. Jimmy's a bottle of beer. Waiting for the cyclone ain't really much fun. Oh, there's another one in here. Life isn't good here, and life isn't bad. Life barely exists here at all. Those who belong nowhere only belong here, beyond the 26th parallel. Big Jimmy deals again and steals a smoke. Nobody minds 'cause he's a real good bloke. The bets are rising and so's the sweat, and they go na 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 na. Belinda's bored, so she clicks on the tally. Someone yells out to turn it down. Zach the dog is lying on his belly, tongue out, na 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 na. Waiting for the cyclone ain't really much fun. Na 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 na. Waiting for the cyclone ain't really much fun. Na 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 na. When I wrote the book, Before It Breaks there, I had initially thought that the book would be the return of Snowy Lane, who had started in City of Light way back in 1995, and in book terms we first met Snowy in 1979. But as I was writing the book, I realised that it wouldn't suit Snowy. It wasn't quite as sprawling, even though it was quite big going from Australia to Germany. And it needed a police officer to really investigate the crime that I'd created. And so I had to create a new character, which was Dan Clement. And so Dan Clement was in that, and who knew what was going to happen to Snowy? It looked like he had gone lost. Now, all the time this is happening, I'll tell you a few oogly things now. I decided when I did City of Light, and Snowy Lane, he's mostly referred to as Snowy, but there's a couple of parts where his dad or his mum calls him by his first name, which is Richard. And so his real name is Richard Lane. Now, 3 months after, that came out in October 1995, City of Light, so January 1996 was the first, 26th of January, Australia Day, first abduction of the Claremont serial killings. Since after that, the world kind of started to imitate art a bit. 3 girls, as we know, at least 3, were abducted in Claremont. In City of Light, the abductions happened around Netherlands and Claremont area. Partially I had based that on the Verney abductions, which had happened earlier, and at least 1 girl was taken from up in Claremont there. So I had thought, and people kept saying, oh, over 20 years, every time I came back to Perth, the whole Claremont serial killing thing was still there, and it was, I remember going through Bayview Terrace a couple of, even 2 years after it had all gone, and it was just like deserted, like a ghost town. People didn't want to go there. Gradually that had regained some sort of normality, but the question was still on everybody's minds. And I toyed with the idea, do I want to do something? I thought, no, look, it's too close. I wanted to do something in one way because it affected me in a couple of ways. One of which was that when they formed the task force investigation, the very first task force to look into the disappearance of the girls of the Claremont serial killing, the detective they appointed, his name was Detective Richard Lane, exactly the same name as Snowy. The second girl who disappeared, Jane Rimmer, the original cover of City of Light, the photographer's name was Brad Rimmer. And in fact, someone wrote to the Daily News at the time saying the killer's got a hold of this book and is using it, So I thought for years maybe the police would, speak to me, but they didn't until I'm sitting in, about 5 years ago, I'm sitting there in Sydney, and there's a knock on my door, and I open the door and there's 2 guys in suits there, and I thought possibly Mormons or, somebody selling Watchtower or something. And they said, oh, are you Dave Warner? I said, yes. And they said, oh, we're detectives from the West Australian Police Force, from the Cold Case Squad. And I thought initially, I had actually played another gig where a girl had gone missing from one of my gigs many years before, and initially the police had thought that she'd been abducted from that gig, but they later realised that she had gone back home and been sent around for about another 12 or so hours before she disappeared. And I thought that was what it was about, because they'd interviewed me at the time, did I see her in the audience, did I know anybody there, and I wasn't much help, I couldn't remember that at all. But then what happened was, they said, well, 6 people have named you as a suspect in the Claremont serial killing case. And do you mind if we interviewed him? So I said no and invited them in, and they were very proper, very polite, very thorough, and in the end I gave them a DNA sample. So it was a weird interlude in your life to happen, but it was very interesting, the things that they were telling me, that it was 20 years on, that young women now at this stage were coming back to things, had no idea of what had happened before. So sort of behaviours where people might have been a bit cautious, they'd all gone out the window again. And so I started to think, this story is following me around, and I decided a little bit after that, I thought, I'm going to do, Snowy Lane is going to come back, and I'm going to use that template. Not the exact case, I'm going to shift it a little bit, but I want to use that template because it had such a psychological scarring on the whole of Perth and the people that I knew, and so I'm going to start doing that book. So I started doing the book, and I think I'd got a third of the way through it. Snowy Lane was back, and I was where am I going to start this book? The last time we saw him was in 1989, so for this book I started it in 1999, and that was 3 years after the real Claremont serial abductions, and but I put him in a case like that, and where parents asked him to look for something, and knowing only as much as any of you would have from reading the papers, I thought, gee, one of the crimes that I've seen, when they talk about precursor crimes, the one that seems really obvious to me as a potential link is the Karrakatta Cemetery rape. So Snowy decides he'll investigate the Karrakatta Cemetery. I was thinking that's the one that's going to nail the serial killer, and I'd got through the first third of the book where he thinks he's failed. He goes there, and as it turns out, he hasn't failed. There's a few reasons why it doesn't quite, and I'm not going to do a spoiler why it doesn't quite work out for him, but he thinks he's failed. And it was right around that time that I then found out there was actually a link. Brett Christian in the CB Post revealed that there was a link between the DNA found in the Karrakatta rape and on the third victim in the Claremont serial killing. So there again, once again, Snowy and Warner stuff. So that book came out. Hopefully, it's doing well. And of course, I finished the book, and then within about 2 months of me finishing the book, the suspect has been charged. Who knows where that will go? There's a bit of time to go on that yet. But that takes me to the new book. Yes, we're going nicely for time, Tone. Actually, doing it really well. That takes me to the new book, River of Salt. An idea that I got about 8 years ago. I was watching Mad Men, the TV show. I don't know if any of you watched that. And I really liked it. The 60s, it was always very evocative because I was a kid growing up in that period. But I also liked the way that in Mad Men the episodes could be quite off to the side here or there, but each of the episodes had a kind of thematic wholeness about it, even if the kind of strong storyline diverted and went around the place. And I thought I'd like to do a book like that. It's something that was in the back of my head. Anyway, my friend Martin Cillier, the other guitarist that often plays with me, and with Tony, Martin's an incredible surf guitarist, Australia's top surf guitarist and one of the top surf guitarists in the world. And he was playing with an Australian band, the Atlantics, who were doing a little tour. Now, the Atlantics had a huge worldwide surf hit in 1963 or 4 called Bombora. And he was playing down the road. So I went down the road, and you go down steps to this place called the Old Manly Boat Shed, and it's like a 1960s time warp, and it just looks like it. And here's this band playing these surf tunes, and through my head I was getting all these images of growing up as a kid that I saw Annette Funicello, a Bikini Beach, Ride the Wild Surf, and these things were always fun, and everyone was always ridiculously happy and fun, and they were kind of B-grade teen filler movies that played very well in the drive-ins at the time. But as I was watching this, I thought, gee, what a great... I had this feeling, wouldn't this be great to use this 60s beach culture and do something with it? And I conceived a TV series first, and thought, but I thought, oh, I don't know whether it should be comedy or should it be drama, but reality told me I was more likely to get something made if it was drama, and so I conceived it as a crime series because that's my kind of genre. And I scripted around a little bit, no one seemed to snap at it, so I thought I'm going to write a book, and then keep the structure of the book as my TV series idea, where each chapter, not every single chapter, but a lot of the chapters are kind of almost like their own story, almost like a little short story. And so we're left with River of Salt, which is set in predominantly 1963. It starts off in 1961. I won't be doing many spoilers here, but it starts off in 1961 in Philadelphia, and there's a young guy, Blake, who is a contract killer for the Philly mob, but who wants out of that life. And he doesn't really know how he doesn't know really where he wants to go, what he wants, until one day he's walking past an apartment and he hears this weird music incredible music coming from inside, and it turns out it's Dick Dale, the first of the, on a record, the first of the surf guitarists, and this inspires him. He wants to go to California. Now, things take a bad turn in one way or another, and he winds up having to get out of Philadelphia, and he winds up a lot further in Philadelphia. He ends up on the north coast of New South Wales, and what happens there is that he has his kind of little Eden until things go badly wrong. A woman is murdered up the coast and it looks like his whole world is going to come crashing down, and then we have Blake the killer has to turn into a kind of detective himself to save his world, and that's, you know, it's an interesting thing. It's really plays with some real light and shade in the characters, and I'll just read a little bit from it. I'll actually read the opening. Hopefully there's no one from Philadelphia here who can criticise my accent too much. It's a fucking disgrace. The country has gone down a shitter. Holding the offensive newspaper in his fat left hand, little Joey backhanded it with his right, the same way he smacked around a numbers runner who hadn't made his quota. Al knew what was coming next. What had come next every morning since April, making breakfast even more stressful. Fucking Russians. Fucking Russians! There it was. Al nodded as if in sympathy, but in truth he admired Yuri Gagarin, admired anybody who could sit in a fucking tin drum and be shot into outer space. How many Russian cosmonauts were up there just floating around? You'd never believe what the Russians told you. Could be dozens. Mind you, given the job these last few months, it might be relaxing. Every bodyguard he knew had an ulcer. So far Al seemed to have been spared, but perhaps that was just because he hardly felt like eating. You couldn't put two hands on a burger for fear of a bullet in the back of your neck. Bodyguard used to be a good job, prestigious. But ever since Carmelo had gone on the warpath, it had turned to shit. Philly was a fucking slaughterhouse. Little Joey should have distanced himself from Carmelo, but what little Joey was thinking, erroneously in Al's considered opinion, was that if Carmelo won the struggle with the Don, then he would come up gunning for those who had been his enemy. Joey wasn't dumb. Well, not that dumb. He knew he couldn't sit on the fence forever, but he was holding out, hoping New York stepped in, said enough is enough. You assholes can't sort out your own problems, we're taking over. In which case, he might be rewarded for keeping a cool head. Al smuggled a look at the boss slurping his coffee. There was a difference between being cool and being negligent. Refusing to change your habits, that was negligent. And who were the suckers who were going to pay for such negligence? Sam, sitting opposite, stopped scanning the doorway for a moment to meet his eye, thinking exactly the same thing. We're the ones going to take lead, and all he wants to do is talk Russians. They've got women astronauts too, can you believe that? No point correcting the boss, he'd forget cosmonaut by lunch. Stubborn little motherfucker. He ate breakfast here most every day. They'd made it as secure as possible. Two guys at the back door, Caesar in the car out front, them in the boot, so they only had to defend 3 sides maximum. Including staff, there were 15 people beside them. The skinny guy at the stool in the cheap suit, some sort of insurance guy, would be Al's guess, was there most days. Same for the college kid, looked like Troy Donahue with the glasses. He was always reading a book or a magazine at a table by himself. Apart from them, a couple of secretaries grabbing a bite to eat, a henpecked husband and his wife, the staff who were mainly Polacks. Day before yesterday had been a bit of a scare. That shiver you feel. 2 guys, heavy set in suits, walked in off the street. Al's hand had gone straight to his inside coat pocket. He'd felt Sam tense, the same. The guys had ordered ham and eggs and sat on the far side. In the end, nothing but the tension. Oh. They'll have women in space before we've even got one of our guys up there. Joey was shaking his head. He didn't even look up at the tinkle of the front doorbell, but Al and Sam did. A couple of guys looked like plumbers, no threat. Breathe out. You guys seen Arnold Palmer on TV? No, boss. Al didn't own a TV. If he did, he would not be watching golf. Golf had become little Joey's latest thing. The plumbers were getting coffee. Al watched, just in case. The guy's amazing. The golf course was another place that was a pain in the ass to watch over the boss. Little Joey was a terrible golfer. He swung like he was swatting flies. Al was sure his boss hated it, but the New York guys had taken it up and the ripples had spread. Sam and Al spent half their time looking out for snipers and the rest of the time looking for Joey's ball. That's one fucking thing the Russians can't do, play golf. Al's eyes followed the plumbers. Backs to him now, sitting on their stools. The bell rang again. Al's eyes flicked quickly like the top of a whip. Two guys, suits, same guys as the day before. He watched, real careful now. I need gloves. Would he just shut up? Ricky says ever since he bought gloves, his game has improved. I have to stop slicing. Some guys hook, I slice. Al sensed somebody approaching. He tensed and swung, relaxed. Only Troy Don. If Al had time, he would have congratulated the kid on his demeanour, his whole technique, his patience, and of course his accuracy. But he never got that far because suddenly there was an automatic in the kid's hand and Al knew he'd been bested and it was the end. He never even felt the sting of the .22 caliber bullet, being already dead when the kid shot Sam through the throat. Acting on instinct, little Joey picked up the newspaper to shield his head. The kid put two right through the photo of Yuri Gagarin, the one thing little Joey might have approved of, into little Joey's brain, and then he walked calmly out the door. That's Blake, our hero, and you might find, you think I'm never going to like that guy, but I think you might find that you do. Now on page 33 of the book, if you get it, I was writing the book and I got to this point where he's practicing his surf guitar, and he's really got a thing for Doreen and vice versa, who is his bar manager, but he doesn't want to burden her with the past of his life. He never thinks he'll be worthy for true love, but he's singing and practicing, and he's written this song on the guitar. So I wrote the song in the book, and to get the rhythm of where the punctuation of the action in the song, I had to write the song. And I could hear the song really clearly in my head, so I wrote it down. And then I finished the book and was well and truly finished. And then about 2 months ago, I thought, oh, why don't I record the song? And then when the book comes out, I can put the song on Spotify or YouTube, and if people are reading the book and they want to get the atmosphere, they can click on it. So I've done it. You can get it. Foolishly, though, I've left all the links on that. I'd specially got the publishers to put all these beautiful links on a piece of paper and how you could get onto my mailing list and everything. I've left all that in the car. So I haven't managed to do that today. But if you go online and you look for, on Spotify, look for No Good Can Come From This, Dave Warner, or on YouTube, or go to my website, davewarner.com.au, and I'd love to have you on mailing list and things if I'm doing anything to let you know, and always like getting feedback from people, good, bad, indifferent. I much prefer good, but a bit of bad's not too bad. So No Good Can Come From This is the song that he's singing. Tony and I are going to play it for you now. She holds my world in her fingertips, revives my heart with her sweetest lips. It's bliss each time we kiss, but we know no good can come of this. She lifts my soul with those eyes divine, heavenly body, lips the sweetest wine. It's bliss each time we kiss, but we know no good can come of this. Though her love is a waterfall, this man's heart is but sand. He still thinks he can have it all, that he'll rue the day love came to stay. She holds my world in her fingertips, revives my heart with her sweetest lips. It's bliss each time we kiss, but we know no good can come of this. Though her love is a waterfall, this man's heart is but sand. She still thinks She can have it all, but she'll rue the day love came to stay. Heaven be up to those angels' wings. Heaven lies here in forbidden things. I've tried to be strong, and it don't seem wrong, but I've known all along no good can come of this. No good can come of this. Put your name written all over it. No good can come of this.
No good could come.
Well, thank you very much. It's been terrific fun. This kicks off. This is number 1 for us, and it's been a real pleasure to get out here. And thank you for your support and the support of the library. And can't tell you, I feel very, very blessed to have library staff who are active and want to get in and do things. And it's certainly, this is not repeated in the eastern states. I can let you know that's very, very hard. And I'm very pleased that Western Australia is carrying on things. Tony and I are going to relax in a minute. I'm happy to talk about anything. I'm happy to sell you anything. The booksellers here are really happy. These poor booksellers who are, you know what it's like, shops are closing down everywhere. Do you want another nail salon out here in Armadale, or another cafe, or or another place selling smashed avocado? I don't know if they do that in Armadale, perhaps not, just smashed. But anyway, they're there. They need the bucks just as much as I do. So please feel free if you'd like a book. I'll happily sign anything. If you've brought anything that you may have had in the past, I'm happy to sign that. Talk about anything. We've got about 12 minutes before we have to vacate and the library closes, something like that. But we'll finish off now. We'll do a little Warner number just to finish off. We'll take it away.
I completely forgot about that.
Yeah. You're busy on that red wine. Weren't you trying to get your second one going?
Just so phased out. That's great.
Okay.
Here we go. 2, 3. Ah!
You can be a bit louder, Tony.
I can't know one going. It's American. It's American, but it's very quiet. No, it won't. No, it won't. Unfortunately, I'm so sorry. The thing is,
I think it was louder for his song, don't you think?
I
I think
do
it was
this.
louder for his song.
No, I do these bits.
Yeah, the old,
It's kind of, you pay me per watt, don't you? And basically, it's 6 watts and you're only getting 4.
All right, man, hit it again then. Sorry.
It's just, the amp's not quite powerful enough. We should have a mic in front of it. I'll turn it up a bit. It's a bit distorted, but who cares about it? Good rock out. Okay, now, everybody with hearing aids, turn them down because it's going to be really heavy. This. Here we go. Whoa!
I wake up every morning with no one beside me. I wake up every morning, my mother will chide me. I'm just a suburban boy, just a suburban boy. Saturday night, no subway stations. Saturday night, just changing TV stations. I'm just a suburban boy, just a suburban boy. And I know what it's like to be rejected every night, and I'm sure that it must be easier for boys from the city. I go to the football and I cheer for my team. I go to the football just to hear myself scream. I'm just a suburban boy, just a suburban boy. Sunday session, I'm down at the hotel staring at girls that I don't know. Well, I'm just a suburban boy, just a suburban boy. And I know what it's like to be rejected rejected every night, and I'm sure that it must be easier for boys from the city.
Go and give up. Bit of Morris music there. Go, Dave.
I wake up every morning with no one beside me. I wake up every morning, my mother will shout me. I'm just a suburban boy. I am just a suburban boy. Sunday session, I'm down at the hotel staring at girls that I don't know. And I'm just a suburban boy. I am just a suburban boy. And I know what it's like to be rejected every night, and I'm sure that it must be easier for boys from the city. Easier for boys and girls from the city. Thank you, Armadale. Stick around, probably food and our song.
Oh,